I can start with a question while people are gathering their thoughts. So my question is, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, only 25% of the population volunteered in some capacity last year. Can you speak to maybe why you think that is? What are the challenges in your communities? Why you don't think that giving of service is something that more people are doing?
Great question.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll offer just an observation along these lines. My view is that some people are just lazy. Quite a few actually. But apart from that, it does seem to me that we've moved into a phase in our culture and society in which we are increasingly convinced that our well-being is dependent on our consumption of things that give us pleasure momentarily or longer term. And that is a constant cultural message and theme. And that as long as we imbibe that cultural message and theme, then that's where we focus our energy and attention. And the sort of common sense teaching, I think, of all of our religious traditions, and even the observable common sense thing, which I feel better actually when I engage in social activity and giving to others, gets drowned out. And so, quite apart from our analysis of human nature, I think we're in a cultural phase in which we've become quite convinced that well-being is associated with consumption. And that is a fruitless activity, but it keeps us from volunteering for other things. That's just my guess.
After Sandy, there was a concert that raised thousands of dollars for the Sandy victims. But human needs are not just crises of huge proportion. They're also daily crises, like the person that you were talking about. And we don't have a lineup of sexy starlets and great talents or whatever you have coming and drumming that. That's the other thing. Right? It's something that, and even there, I think this term of fatigue that's associated, right, with development work that the UN does and various other institutions do. So you will see that people are now turning around saying, well, don't give us that $1,000 check. Let us dip into your account on a monthly basis and take that out. So you won't even know. I think that's a problem. Okay? It's a solution, but it's a problematic solution. Perhaps the place that this concern can be addressed is with the children. That it's inculcated that if one of your friends has fallen down in the yard, in the playground, you've got to help them up. And that makes that person stronger as well as yourself. It's not a zero gain situation. It's a win-win situation that comes out of this. And I think I agree, that's from the me generation, and maybe our generation, that's my generation, not you guys, but my generation has that problem, and perhaps it's a redirection that your generation can do. Bring up your kids so that they're looking out for the other. They're looking out for the other as ourselves.
Can I add one other thing? I think it may not be peculiar to the Christian community, but this is still a dominantly Christian culture, and this discourse tends to take place. Rabbi Hammond's statements reminded me of this. An idea has grown up that's quite peculiar, I think, to American Christianity, that doing something good for another person is really worthless unless you sincerely want to do it. In other words, you have to sort of get yourself in the psychological mode of really loving the other person. And then once you achieve this particular psychological mode, then helping them is good. But until you've achieved that, it's hypocritical. And we like to use that word. And I think one of the things that Rabbi Hanan reminds me of is that, and this actually has a much deeper tradition in Christianity, is no, you do it because you were told to. You know, this great film and the great thing in Chariots of God, where they're talking about whether you should keep the Sabbath or not. And the old Scottish guy looks at this other guy and goes, "It's not a democracy." By which he means you don't go to church because you feel like going to church. You go to church because God told you to go to church. Right? You may feel like it later. That, in my own Wesleyan tradition, is very deep as well. And Wesley, being Anglican, would have said exactly the same thing. It's a hopeless thing if you wait to be sincere. You know? And so those of us, at least in our tradition, this is where we need to rediscover a tradition of building disciplines and recognizing that discipline pathways then create this as a habit of life. You'd probably say meditation, and that these become habitual ways of life that are also habitual ways of being healthy. So that's.
Can I add to that? One of the things that happened in the public schools where I worked for many years, but really through the 1990s in our particular district, is that students had the opportunity to take the course called community service and get credit for that, but mainly to learn the idea of service. And I think that was something that was always there, but it was never organized like that. And it was amazing how many students wanted to do that. Not because it was a pass-fail class, but because they really were interested in finding a way to give back, to contribute. And so what I learned from that is that the idea of service has to be taught. I do think there are folks who have that feeling, maybe innately, but I think the possibility for all of us to learn that is there, and starting with the children is a great place.
We have a question.
Thank you. Oh, this is great stuff. And there's, Robert, and you know this all too well, there's also this sort of, I call it the doctrine of theological indifference in Christianity that has grown around this very sort of fundamentalist, kind of right center, if you will, theology about raptures and whatnot. You know, it's like, well, who cares if the world is going to hell? Jesus has got to come back and clean up the mess, so why bother? So how do you make the world more human with that kind of theology that's so prevalent, not in the Bible Belt, but I mean, you know, throughout the United States, but...
You asking me?
Well, no. Yeah, sure. But, I mean,
It's a question of timing, though, right? Jesus has to come in your time. Otherwise, you're also dead.
right. Now we're getting into realized eschatology and all that. But, I mean, I love the notion of the commandment, and then the feeling comes later, and then you both sort of kind of discuss that idea. But what, I mean... What do you do with that sense of indifference, even in your own faith traditions or your other faith traditions?
May I give a practical example?
Oh, sure.
When I become a professor, and I have a bevy of students that I'm going to advise, but not the 50 master students that you do right now, one of the projects that I'm going to set them is to go and study the Ismaili community and look at how many kids have given up other careers to go and do voluntary work. Because the Aga Khan's teaching, just about everything that he talks about, he's talking about service to the other. He's talking about civil society. This is a function of, in my humble opinion, it's a function of post-Cold War, where the two blocks have kind of collapsed, and we know how collapsing all of these countries are, where the governments are not able to provide for and have no inclination. There's a sense of indifference, a different theology of indifference there, not a Christian theology of indifference. But they're not able to provide for the well-being of their citizens. So the society communities and societies which have held together by people cooperating, there is an encouragement of that. And I see My younger brother is an example of this, where he gives up a career being the IT director for the third largest airline in the UK and going and working in Afghanistan. Just after, while the war's going on. Right? So this is creating those structures, institutional, legal, or just the concepts of look at the other face, and as you said, when somebody is welcome, you're welcoming divinity. When you look at the other person, you look in the mirror. And then